I'm Andy Hunt. Let me just ask a question of the several of you in the audience. Have you heard of Grows before? Have you heard of me before? No. Great. I can say anything. Okay. Excellent. Well, I am frustrated by technology often, especially when it doesn't work. It's a hardware problem. All right, manual override. There we go. I've written 10 books, including the original and classic Pragmatic Programmer, which regularly gets to the top 10 lists of best books on computer programming sort of ever. It was beginner's luck, to be quite honest about it. Co-wrote the first edition of the Programming Ruby book, which introduced Ruby to the Western world. Wrote a couple others, Pragmatic Thinking and Learning, Practices of an Agile Developer, a book on Minecraft for the kids, and I'm just finishing up a science fiction book, which has actually been an interesting experience. I was one of the 17 people who came up with the manifesto for Agile software development and pushed the idea of Agile onto an unsuspecting world. If you go to agilemanifesto.org, that is the back of my head. Still kind of looks like that, don't you think? Not too bad. Haven't lost all my hair yet. So, I'm going to give the presentation a wee bit backwards here, just because we all have the attention span of gnats, and the donuts haven't hit yet. So I'm going to give you first a couple slides on the TLDR version of what I'm going to talk about. Grows. What is this? The marquee said the Grows method. What's this guy talking about? What's this all about? Well, this is my response to people adopting Agile poorly and doing Agile very badly out in the world and not knowing what Agile is and not getting benefit from it. So Grows is an idea of emphasizing knowing instead of guessing, getting rid of fortune telling, using real-world, real-time feedback, and being more inclusive in the organization. Agile methods so far have been focused at developers. They haven't really said anything to executives, managers, architects, testers, users, the rest of the community, right? You want user involvement? Great. Have we told them what to do? We want to talk with managers. We want to talk with executives. Have we told them how? We haven't done any of that. So, what is Grows about? It's about lowering risk by using tracer bullet development as a model. It's about making accurate decisions throughout by using the continuous paradigm throughout. It's about converging on success with explicit experiments, now all modulated by the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, which guides how we do things. So what are these things about? Well, I like to call this the continuous paradigm instead of just continuous build, continuous integration, continuous deployment, whatever it might be. This is one of those things where people are like, oh, of course we do that, Andy. Sure, we have continuous builds. Our last one ran on Thursday. I seriously had somebody tell me that. I've had people tell me they do daily stand-up meetings on Fridays. So clearly, when we say do a thing, or you should do a thing, people often come off with their own interpretations of it. So when we talk about continuous paradigm, we're talking about everything all the time. You check in code, it fires off a build. It fires off tests. You have something that if you wanted to, you could release to customers. Right then, right there, no BS, no excuses. That is the continuous paradigm. If you don't have that environment, your software is broken. You just don't know it yet. You'll find out when you build it, when you run it, when you test it, when someone tries it. But if you don't have that, then you've got the red traffic light. You're stopped. There's no progress. There's no steering. You got nothing. So we want the metaphorical traffic light here to be all green all the time. Why? So we can get feedback. It's all about feedback. This talk started about 10 minutes late. The previous speaker ran over 10 minutes. Why do you think she ran over 10 minutes? Why did she miss the estimate? Why did she miss the schedule? Why did that project run over? No feedback. There's no clock in the back. There's no little speaker monitor up here with a countdown clock. There's no person at the side of the stage with one of those big hooks to come and drag you out when you run over. There's no feedback. And what happens? Ran late. Surprise, surprise. We advocate tracer bullet development to minimize risk. Tracer bullets was something that we came up with as a metaphor back in the Pragmatic Programmer book at the turn of the century. Cough. The idea being, if you're going to fire on a hostile target, you can either set up a big old howitzer and take measurements and compensate for the wind drift and look up on a firing table or a computer, figure it all out, get ready and shoot, and if anything changed, you miss. If the enemy moved, you're out of luck. Right? Now that's great if you're shooting at something big that's not moving, like a city or an island, right? If you're shooting at something that's in motion, that's not going to work. So instead, you use tracer bullets. Tracer bullets, you've got one round that lights up every so many rounds. So as you're firing, you get to see with real-time feedback where the ammunition is landing. If the target is in constant motion, it's not a problem. You can track it. And you can follow it and lock on. That is the metaphor that we want to use. People say, oh, sure, yeah, incremental and iterative development, we do that. Well, maybe not really. What we're talking about with tracer bullets is it's similar to bridge construction, right? You can do a suspension bridge in the old days. You start with a cable, anchored on both ends. It goes all the way across, and you add on from there. That's what we want to see in software to minimize risk. Is you write the very first version of the project, however huge it is, you write that in the first day or 2 or 3 days. It's hello world. It doesn't do anything, but it goes end to end, like that one cable. You can't actually drive cars across that, but hey, already you've come across, well, these are the 2 ends that we've picked. Well, maybe after you do that, you realize, oh, we didn't think about this, but that's actually not going to work out. We need to move this end over a little bit. Easy to do now, a lot harder to do later. So you've got low inertial mass, it's easier to make critical changes when you're still figuring things out. And then you add folks to it, you start building on, fleshing it out, and then voila, you get the nice shiny at the end. We want to promote the idea of experiment to be a first-class part of the method. Try it and find out, because if you don't do that, then we're back to fortune telling. And that's something we very much want to avoid. So, okay, technical answers, that's one thing you can do with experiments. What JavaScript framework should we use? Well, let's see, it's 11 o'clock on a Friday. There have been 6 new JavaScript frameworks announced this morning. Which one do we pick? I have no idea. That's how you find out. Pick 3, do an experiment, see how it turns out. Get data. No experiment fails. All experiments give you data. This is how you adopt process. We want to try doing this a different way. We want to try one of these agile processes. We want to try Kanban. We want to try whatever. Don't do it all at once. That's silly. You pick one and you make an experiment and try it. See what works. Change it. Adopt it. Adapt. Don't adopt. So, okay, great. That's the TLDR version. Now, the problem is, it's not that easy. Life is rarely that simple. So let's take a step back, talk a little bit. First of all, we throw this word around, the agile movement, agile processes like Scrum, XP, Lean, Kanban, whatever. What is agility really all about? I went into a client a couple years back, interviewed them, and said, they'd recently gone through an agile adoption. I said, what do you guys define, what do you think of agility? And they said, oh, that's management's way to kick our ass. I said, really? Tell me what y'all are doing, because I don't think that's how it's supposed to work. And indeed, what they were doing was not agile in any way, shape, or form. And it turns out there's a lot of that going on. So, any fans of Star Wars? Star Trek? Doctor Who? Firefly? Okay. No, nothing you guys don't like to do. Okay, fine. Who's got the best villain? And someone, of these two, who's got the best villain? Somebody always yells out Doctor Who. It's like, okay, that's not on the table. So let's look at the villains for a second, right? The Star Wars prequels are easy to make fun of, so I will. You've got the droid army, right? Now, first time you see the movie where these things appear, you're like, wow, this is awesome. This huge ship lands, massive firepower. These droids like come pouring out like cockroaches out of the kitchen. Just as, wow, how could we possibly fight that? Well, pretty simple, actually. They have a single point of failure. You take out the control ship, and not only can they no longer fire, they actually lose structural integrity and fall apart right on the battlefield. Genius. So single point of failure, and they don't adapt very well. They're easily fooled, they're easily tricked, you can go around them. They're just kind of straight line, shooting, doing their thing. Not very frightening as a villain goes. Now in Star Trek, on the other hand, they came up with this marvelous idea of the Borg, which is not a Swedish meatball. It's short for the sort of cyborg kind of thing. And the scary thing about them is adaptability. Whatever you use to fight them, they figure out a way around it. So the scary thing in movies is like, oh, Captain, they've adapted. And then suddenly whatever you were shooting is ineffective. And you gotta do something else. And then they adapt to that. And that's ineffective. And you gotta do something else. So it's like the martial art of judo. You take the enemy's strength and use it against them. That's pretty cool. The Borg's motto is resistance is futile. That's awesome. That actually is what your team's slogan should be. That's what your organization's slogan should be. It doesn't matter if the deadline got moved up, the technology failed, you lost half your team, there was a merger, there was whatever. Resistance is futile. We're just going to win anyway. That's what Agile is supposed to be about. It's not about backlog grooming, which is a Scrum term, which I always thought sounded like monkeys picking nits off each other's backs. They've gone away from that verbiage, fortunately. It's not about stand-up meetings, daily meetings, even if you only have them on Fridays. It's not about burn-down charts, or burn-up charts, really. And I always get this the long way around. One of them works, the other one's completely wrong. You want the one that keeps growing as you add features at the top. So it'd be a burn down, I guess. Directionally challenged. Burn-up charts are you're losing data. It's not about velocity, it's not about TDD, it's none of these things. So, what is agility? What's the right metaphor for agility? You say, well, Scrum uses the word sprint. Is it really a sprint? No, that was a poor choice. That was a poor choice of word. It's not a sprint. It's what happens after a sprint. You're exhausted. You're possibly puking, right? This is not really sustainable. That's a poor metaphor. Okay, fine. So it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? We're in it for the long haul. Well, no, not really either, because that's still a straight, linear, run as fast as you can. And that is not the field of software development. Software development is an obstacle course. You don't know what's coming. You cannot predict what's coming next. So how do you train for something like that? Well, if you had a real obstacle course, you would do things like strength training. You try to notice changes in your surroundings that's coming up, practice changing direction, and when you stumble and fall off the obstacles, you would learn what to strengthen next time. So in software, okay, well, we'd like to grow technical skills. That's obvious, that's necessary, we need that. But we need to develop awareness and communication. We need to think more closely about disposable software in the idea of we want to be able to change direction quickly, right? Now, if you're running an obstacle course, you can just move. In software, when we move, we have to throw out something when we do that. So maybe we should look at getting better at that. Growing new skills, okay? We suggested back in the Pragmatic Programmer book, you should learn at least a new programming language every year. I stand by that very heartily. If you learn Elixir or F#, a functional programming language, you will see the world in a very different way than if you're slogging it out through some crap, half-assed procedural language like Java. What if you wrote the same program or function 3 different ways, using 3 different paradigms? That would be an interesting exercise. What if you just simply did exercises to strengthen where you were weak? as they say on the net, never skip leg day. You can laugh, it's okay. So developing awareness. This is really all about feedback. And a lot of the Scrum and Lean flow value ideas kind of help keep the conversation alive, but it's important to remember it's a conversation. As soon as you look at putting something in a static form, the backlog, a document, Jira. As soon as you go to something like that, now it's static. Now you're losing the conversational aspect of it necessarily. The key thing is feedback. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a little bit. But in terms of changing direction quickly, perhaps we should stop treating software as precious. I've seen organizations waste a tremendous amount of effort in trying to make code maintainable or extensible or reusable. Reusable was the big buzzword in the 90s, right? 90s, early 2000s, reusability, baby. Total wasted effort. Why is it a wasted effort? Because you can't predict. I can't predict. Humans cannot predict. We suck at that. There's cognitive reasons I could go on for another hour as to why we suck at making predictions. But take my word for it for now. It's not something we want to do because we're not good at it. So instead, what if we focused all that effort into making bits of software more easily replaceable? That helps coupling, cohesion, encapsulation, motherhood, apple pie, all those sorts of wonderful things, so that if you can't rip out any piece of a design easily, then your design sucks. It's that simple. That is the world where we find ourselves. Which means we have to have code that can be read easily, reasoned about clearly, and replaced quickly. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that solve a lot of day-to-day issues? Okay? So this idea of being able to change direction quickly, be able to change direction frequently and easily, that's what Agile is supposed to be about. Now, instead, what we get is a lot of organizations will go in and they'll get some consultants, they'll get some training, and they'll say, "Oh, Agile is great. This is wonderful." It's like this guy with the stick. "This is the best stick ever. This is wonderful." And sure, anything you do straight up, just the idea of doing something new is great at first. But then it starts getting a little complicated. You start reading different opinions on things. These folks say to do this, and those folks say to do that, and what are we supposed to do? And it gets a little confusing if you even care to take it that far. Most companies just don't bother. They just do this sort of approach where they're like, "Oh, hey, look, we slapped this on, we're Agile, we've got a big word on the wall now that says Agile, and yeah, baby, we are an Agile organization." The car's not actually going any faster. And it looks ridiculous, too. They get folks who are like, "Well, we did what you said, we did the practices, and it didn't work out." Right? So this is the case here. Best practice for launching a boat in this manner is to put the boat on the trailer and drive the trailer into the lake. I followed the directions. It didn't work out for me. Effective when used as directed, but people don't read directions. We don't read that stuff. Or we believe stuff we read on the net when we shouldn't. Did you see, this is the latest thing, just like the last week or two, there's this thing going around YouTube saying that, there's actually a hidden headphone jack on the iPhone 7. And if you take a 3.5 millimeter drill and drill into your iPhone on the side, you will discover the hidden headphone jack. And God help us if folks have been doing this. Right? So there's this hue and cry from folks on the net going, "You ruined my phone, you sick bastards, you ruined my phone." And I'm thinking, okay, so we've hit a low point for critical thinking on the net. But, this is what we're up against. So, back to agility for a moment. The practices don't actually matter. Not one whit. It's the principles that are more important. But the problem is you can't give beginners principles because they have no context to know how to understand that, how to apply that, how to deploy that. No one reads the fine print. We still have to talk about skills. Capers-Jones did this great study back around 2000, 2003, where it showed that process didn't matter. This was a huge study, 900 organizations, 6,000 software projects, and he concluded in the preface that the process used didn't matter. If you had smart people, you did better. If you had unskilled people on your team, they dragged you down a lot worse. The effect was magnified for management versus staff. So people matter, the skills matter. And this is where Agile has kind of fallen by the wayside, because what happens with most books or presentations on Agile, they come out with this, it's like that cooking show, right? They come out with this beautiful cake. They start mixing. They start with the eggs in the bowl and this stuff that looks like raw sewage, and they're stirring. And they're like, oh, and we've made one earlier off stage, and voila, they bring out this gorgeous looking thing that they didn't show how they actually made it. And then, here you are with your eggs and flour, have at it. Right? This is what we've done with Agile. We show them with this wonderful cake, and they're like, how do we get there? How do we do this? Well, you need the special skills. You need to know, for cooking, how to do the souffle and the frothing and all that kind of stuff. But normally, we have to have different tools at different stages of development, right? Look at the human development, right? You start off, the only thing a newborn can do is suckle. That's literally the only hardwired thing a newborn human can do. So, we have a vessel designed for that method of delivery and safety. It's made out of plastic, unbreakable. You move up to the sippy cup, Hello Kitty, whatnot. Then you get to the standard adult tumbler. It's glass, you can be trusted with that now, more or less. And then you get to the specialized glassware, right? Rydell's got different glasses for white wine versus red wine, or Chardonnay versus a Pinot, or what have you. You get highly specialized kinds of things. And that's how it should be, right? This is what Agile adoption really should look like. You've got to start off with the sippy cup before you get onto the Rydell or the Camelback or whatever it might be. So what we've run into is widespread misunderstandings and misapplications of Agile. There's surveys out there that if you read it, you come to the conclusion that probably half the people in the world think they're doing Agile, and what they're actually doing is half of Scrum badly. Which comes down to the fact of, well, we have meetings and we've got a list of things to do. And that's their backlog and their daily stand-up that happens once a week. We don't have support for beginners. We don't have support for continuous learning. And Agile methods themselves aren't particularly Agile. This to me is the ultimate irony, right? Agile methods haven't changed in 10 years. Not significantly. Has everything else changed in 10 years? You betcha. The manifesto itself says, I know I was there. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. This is not talking about refactoring code. This is not talking about refactoring architecture. This is talking about refactoring the team and the organization and how they work. So this is when people start to get a little uncomfortable in their seats. If you follow Agile practices by the book, you are not Agile. If you're just winging it and making stuff up in your organization, well, that's probably not a good idea either. If you're not changing, if you're doing stuff the same exact way you did 6 months ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, it's not Agile. Unless the industry you're in hasn't changed either one whit, your customers haven't changed, your org hasn't changed, you haven't changed. So, let's fix this. Let's look at some principles maybe. There's the manifesto for Agile software development, individuals, yada yada, all this stuff. Lovely idea. The problem with it is it really didn't go far enough. We say individuals and interactions over processes and tools, sure, but also over tradition and over Agile canon. People speak of Agile canon, which is an absolute oxymoron. How do you have something that's supposed to be infinitely adaptable and changeable and have a fixed canonical set of practices? That makes no sense on the surface of it. Working software over documentation, sure, but also over charts and plans and estimates and radiators and wikis and all the other toys that we end up getting kind of attached to. Customer collaboration over lawyers, any day of the week, over detailed contracts, but also over ignoring users. Look at the trouble both Microsoft got into with Windows 8 and Macintosh's current ridiculous absurdity known as iTunes, which literally had one job: play and sync music. And it doesn't do either of those well anymore. Right? They've ignored their customer base. They've ignored their users at their peril. Responding to change or following a plan, sure, but also over clinging to preconceived notions or repeating the past or ignoring change. Why are you using the tech stack you're using on your current project? Is it because that's what you used on the last project? On the project before? Has anyone done an evaluation to see if that's really the best thing you should be using right now? Maybe. Probably not. It's just handier that way. Okay. Let's talk about practices then for a minute, because this is where it starts getting a little bit dodgy. We can't give principles to beginners because they don't have enough experience to apply it. All right, so then we've got to look at rules, something a little more concrete, a little less abstract. Well, the problem is, when do you follow the rules and when do you go beyond the rules? It's not enough to say, is a particular software development practice good? The real question is, when is it good? In what context? And I love this sign, touching wires causes instant death and a $200 fine. I was going to grab and lick that wire first, but you convinced me otherwise now. That's probably a pretty good rule. As rules go, I'm not going to touch the wire unless there's some very special occasion when the power's cut off and I'm doing maintenance, that sort of thing. Using version control in a software environment, yes, of course. When would you not? Right? That's kind of a hard and fast rule. And I did know a company some years back who used Microsoft Outlook as their version control. They all mailed each other the code at the end of the day. I'm not kidding. I wish I was kidding. It was scarring. It was a scarring event. So when is a practice good? Context becomes really important. You say, oh, these folks are doing pair programming, or these folks are doing a Kanban board, or whatever it might be. Well, that's great. That may or may not work for you, depending on the context. And context is everything. So, an axe is a very fine tool. I've had several. They're great for chopping down trees. It's not something you want to carry while hitchhiking. It's just the wrong context. It sends the wrong message. You go to the bank or the doctor's office and there's a little sign saying free candy. Well, that's wonderful. If you see it out on the road on a van without windows, maybe that's not quite so legit as you might think. It's all context. Which leads us inescapably to the conclusion that one practice doesn't fit all. There is a wide spectrum of project types, everything from exciting new discovery to boring old copy and paste PHP projects to archaeology. Last talk I gave, there were some poor folks in the front row that had to resurrect a couple 100,000 lines of COBOL, and they weren't too happy about that, but it's one of those things. You have different skill levels. You can be very skilled at one thing and utterly unskilled at something else. That's how humans work. If you're skilled at design, you might not be so great as a programmer. You might be very skilled at those things, but not skilled at management. Other way around. This is how it works. You've got different generations, cultures, introverts versus extroverts, neurodiversity issues. It's a bit of a mess. And yet we say, hey, just do this. It's going to work for you. Maybe, maybe not. Right? And even then, practices are still different depending on your skill level, because other people's experience isn't the same as yours. So, how can we do better than what we've tried so far? Well, we suggest that methods should actually embrace an empirical approach. You should test ways of working with each other. See if it works in your context, in your organization. Offer different approaches based on skill levels, remembering that beginners lack self-reflection. And this is a key thing. We'll go into this in a little bit, but you have to be halfway up the skill model before you can begin to self-assess your performance. So Agile relies on self-reflection, right? You have to have the introspection at the end of the iteration, this kind of thing. Beginners cannot do that. That comes later. We should be sensitive to other human needs and cognitive limitations, because we have many of them. If you want a real fun read, look on Wikipedia where the page on cognitive biases. There's 90 common cognitive biases. I've met folks who way exceed that number, but there's there's a lot there that we all are suspect. We need to be inclusive, right? We say, oh yes, well we want to work with executives and users and all the other parts of the organization, but we never told them how. We don't have, there's no Agile method that has particularly practices for management to follow or practices for users to follow. But we expect them to behave in a certain way. We expect them to provide feedback in a certain way, and we never told them how. So that's clearly something we can address. There is no us and them. We're kind of all stuck with this together. So we have the GROWS model, which is inspired by the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, driven by intentional experiments. Experiments are raised to a first-class part of the method. Everyone's included, from executives to customers. We get instant results and continuous results of tracer bullet development, and then the usual incremental and iterative development that everyone is so fond of these days. But the important thing is not to just rely on received wisdom, but actually figure out what works for us in our context. So let me take a little diversion here for a couple minutes and talk about these ideas in some more depth, especially the Dreyfus model. This was something put forth back in the early to mid-70s by two brothers, Hubert and Stuart Dreyfus, who wanted to build an AI, Skynet of the 70s. They wanted to figure out how a computer could learn human skills or learn skills in a human-like fashion. Problem was they didn't know how people learn skills. So this was a bit of a problem. So they started studying that. And what they discovered was there are fundamental differences on how you perceive the world, whether you're a novice versus expert or anywhere in between. So your very perception changes. How you solve problems change. Your mental models, whether you even have mental models, change. How you acquire new skills and get up to the next level changes. What affects your performance. All these things change. So an expert is not just a smarter beginner. You change on multiple axes as you go up the ladder from novice to advanced beginner to competent, proficient, and finally expert. And as you notice on the left there, this is unfortunately not a normal distribution. Now, you would expect a kind of nice little curve with a lump in the middle and the sort of like average competent person in the middle. It's not like that. It's skewed towards the bottom. What happens is most people will start some particular skill, wherever it might be, and fairly rapidly proceed from being a novice to an advanced beginner. It's good enough. You can get through it. You can make it work, sort of. And that's where you stop. Far fewer people go on to actually become competent at whatever the skill is. Fewer still become proficient, and only 1 to 5% of the population ends up becoming actually expert at it. So we've got a bit of a heavy skew towards the bottom. Now, stage one, novice, by definition, has no previous experience. So this is some skill you're starting, you're brand new at it. Typically, novices don't really want to learn, they just want to get it done. They just want to accomplish the goal. This is me doing my taxes, right? I don't really want to learn. I'm not going to study all 50 feet of the US tax code printed out on the shelf. I just want to get the bloody thing done, right? They don't know how to respond to mistakes. I get that letter from the IRS in all caps yelling at me. I don't know what they're on about. I give it to my accountant. I have no idea. I don't know how to respond to mistakes. I am vulnerable to confusion. If you make it rules-based and context-free, I can do it. The old joke 1040 form where it says, fill in how much you made, send that in. Right? Straightforward, I can do that. This is how call centers work. You can get novices in there because they're given a script to follow. They're given rules, context-free rules to follow. Person calls up, asks them this, is it plugged in? And down the tree they go. Right? Novices need steps. They need steps to follow. When you're a novice in something, remember what it's like. It's frustrating. You have no idea. You're trying a new language, you get this, leave off a semicolon in any of the curly brace languages, C, Objective-C, C++, C#, whatever. Leave off a semicolon and look at the spew that comes out. And if you've never done that before, it's like, I have broken the internet. right? I have destroyed the computer. Oh my God, what have I done? And it's just a semicolon. But you don't know that, right? Very frustrating. So you poke at it. You just randomly hit things trying to make the error go away. That's the world of the novice. Now, from there up to advanced beginner, from here you can start trying tasks on your own. There's still difficulty troubleshooting because you don't have any mental models yet to work with. So you're kind of getting there, but you're not really too far yet. The important thing with advanced beginners is not only can they not understand the big picture, they actively don't want it. If you give the big picture to an advanced beginner, you're just going to annoy them and waste both of your time. Instead, what advanced beginners need are small, frequent rewards. Hey, I did this one little thing right. Great. I did this other little thing right. Okay. Step by step, like that. Still rules-based, still not able to deal with context. Now, by stage 3, we actually begin to show some competency. This is, not coincidentally, at the point where you start developing conceptual models in your head of the domain. Because of that, now you have a chance of troubleshooting and being able to seek out expert opinion and expert advice and apply it. So the important thing with competent practitioners is you gain this ability to troubleshoot. You started with mental models. For stage 4, we've actually now achieved proficiency. Proficiency in this case means you can do it without thinking about it. If you're a musician, you don't have to read the chord symbol as you're playing jazz. Notes just come pouring out. You play a scale, your fingers are just moving. You don't know what's happening. It's just happening. It's just in the background. You're doing an agile process. You don't even think about, oh, is this the perfect way to calculate story points or whatever kind of crap. No, you're just doing it. It's just working. It's just flowing. At stage 4, you get frustrated by oversimplified information. Again, going back to the call center. You're calling them up because you've got a problem with a Docker image inside of a VM, inside of a thing, and this other thing, you're having this issue, and they're like, is it plugged in, sir? And you want to go through and rip their heart out because you're frustrated. You can begin to understand and apply maxims, proverbial bits of wisdom that require context. Software patterns, in the classic sense of the gang of 4, gamma and crew, fall into this category. I knew a poor fellow once, novice programmer, who had just read the Gamma book and decided to implement all 23 of the Gang of 4 patterns in this little piece of code he was writing. He got about 18 or 19 of them in, bless his heart, before someone discovered it. But this is what happens when you give stage 4 level advice to a novice that doesn't have the contextual awareness of how to use it properly. Proficient practitioners now finally can self-correct. They need the big picture. They have to have the big picture. They can use patterns. By stage 5, we get up to the expert. The primary sources of knowledge and information, the folks who write books, go to talks, give talks, this kind of thing. These folks work from intuition, not from rules, not from reason. And in fact, in one of the early studies that Dreyfus Brothers did on airline pilots, they made the expert pilots follow the beginners' very concrete rules, and it ruined their performance by, I'm guessing, it was like 300%. It was some astronomical number. If you make experts follow the rules, you have brought them down to the novice level. If you do this team-wide, you get a team full of experts, you would have an incredible waste of money because you're not getting any of the value of their expertise. You've dragged them down to the level of a beginner. Real experts are a small percent of the population. They know the difference between the relevant and the irrelevant details, but, and this is the tricky part, experts are often inarticulate at how they arrived at their decision. So say you have an expert architect and some junior person comes up with an idea and they look at it and go, oh, that's never going to work. That's crap. That's not going to work. Well, why? Well, it just won't. It's obvious. And they're not being obtuse. It's just, it is very often hard to be able to reverse engineer all the bits of data that flowed in and clicked what neurons and did their thing to get you to arrive at that decision. It's like, well, of course, it's obvious. Now explain yourself. I got nothing. Right? This happens to doctors. This happens to firefighters. They study firefighters in high-pressure situations. Why did you decide to run the water line there and attack the fire from this side and put your men there? It's like, it seemed the thing to do. inarticulate at how you arrive at decisions. And that's okay. That's just how our brains work. And of course, intuition is not repeatable, which can cause people angst. So we've got all these people and we have to work together somehow, which can be difficult since we're all novices at any new process and that sort of thing. I love this picture just in general. This was them testing football helmets around the turn of the century. So you put the helmet on, you run full tilt at the wall, and you spike it. And if you survived, they'd make some modifications, and then the next person would try it. And I think, it's for like a patron saint for software development. I think this guy's it right here, right? We're just banging our head against the wall. People talk about full stack developers, which is kind of interesting. Remember, all this talk of the Dreyfus model, talking skills, is all per skill. So you might be an expert at logic gates, but very novice at international law or whatever else. And this list that goes from logic gates up to business and accounting and law, this was interesting because I actually went through a week period, a 1 week period, where I actually did have to traffic in all these things. As owner of a publishing company, I get a wide variety of challenges. And let me tell you, that's a full stack right there. So, okay, great. That was all abstract and lovely, but how does that map to reality? How do we map practices to this idea of skill stages? Well, for novices in stage 1, we want software development practices that focus on hygiene and safety. It'd be like going into some third world or impoverished area to set up a hospital. First thing you're going to train the folks to do is wash their hands. That's actually a big deal. World Health Organization actually has an International Hand Washing Day because that's such a big deal. Because in many parts of the world, you don't have access to water, to soap, to facilities, to what it might be. So if you're going to start a surgery team, you got to wash your hands. For us, the equivalent of washing hands is version control, continuous build, continuous integration, short, concrete feedback loops. Is everything still working? Is it not? If it's not, we want to know immediately. That's our washing our hands. From there, we go on to advanced beginner. You can start to produce actual results. You might introduce practices like iterations, a stand-up meeting, which we call a team sync, just because daily stand-up still makes people do it on Fridays, so we're just getting away from that name entirely. Still, folks have to be rule-based. You have to give them checklists. Do this, do that, make sure you've done this other thing, right? Very, very by the book at this point. And the reason for that is you don't want to have to give advice that's the sort of cook until done recipe, right? This drives me crazy. Something you've never tried before, and they're just like, oh, cook until done. I've never made this kind of thing before. I don't know what that means. Give me something concrete. Is it a temperature? Is it squishy? You're cooking some baked good. Okay, stick a knife in. If it comes out clean, it's done. I can do that. That's a concrete advice. Cook at this temperature for this long or until the smoke detector goes off or this happens or something concrete to work with. And too much advice, especially in the Agile area, is this sort of, oh, you'll just know it. No, you gotta tell me, man. Stage 3, we get up to the competent working stage. This is what you would associate with a modern team doing XP, doing Scrum, that kind of thing. Now you have moved away from checklists to recipes. Now it is a cook until done, because now you can apply judgment and expertise to make these decisions. By stage 4, you're doing it without thinking about it. Now you can start to, perhaps, and this is another tack, but if you've been doing something like XP and Scrum, by stage 4 now you can look to maybe doing Lean and Kanban. Those are kind of more advanced practices, something you probably don't want to try as a beginner. But you can look at that, you can look at other ways to improve, and more importantly, begin to invent new approaches beyond current practice. And this is something as an industry we have failed utterly on. How many new popular software development practices have come out in the last 15 years? 1, 2, 3, a handful-ish, maybe. It's a ridiculously poor number. And we begin to move towards intuition. So it's time to get to the expert. Now we want these folks to get out there and teach to to explore, share, teach new solutions, working from intuition, not rules or recipes. But of course, there is a danger there. They say that as an expert, you have to retain the beginner's mind and entertain that everything's possible. Otherwise, you get to the, oh, it's always been this way, it'll always be this way, you get kind of locked into a rut again, and you run into that problem. So that's the Dreyfus model in a nutshell. Then let me talk a little bit about the empirical approach that we'd like to see. We want to have a process where we can make decisions, answer questions with actual outcomes, and not rely on proxies. Not look at charts or Jira instead of working software. And theories. Well, I read the book. This should have worked. This is no good. Or estimates, otherwise known as wild guesses or fortune telling. We want intentional feedback. And with intentional feedback, before you even start something, before you start a design, before the team starts a piece of code, before you start a meeting, identify the feedback. For the meeting, how are we going to know when we're done? For the design, how are we going to know when we're done? Identify what feedback you're going to get from it and what you're going to do with it when you get it. Then go ahead and do your thing. Get the feedback. You might get different feedback than you expected. You might get feedback from sources you didn't expect. Perfectly okay. Small adjustments. Fix it a little bit, rinse and repeat. Try it again. Small adjustments is key, because what's one of the biggest things that happens to teen drivers when they're first learning to drive is they get into accidents and end up clearing trees off the side of the road because they overcorrect. Right? So you're driving along, you're a novice, you're a teen driver, you happen to go off the road into the shoulder. Oh my goodness, you jam the wheel, 270 degrees to the left, and whoop, you're off the road on the other side. We do this in Agile teams. People do this all the time. It's like, oh, that didn't work. Let's do something completely different. And they end up wrecking the car. Small adjustments. Feedback. A little bit at a time. Feedback loops need to be intentional, as I said. They need to be short, approaching real time. I don't want to get results from this experiment a year from now, or even 6 weeks from now, or even tomorrow. I want it right now. I want feedback in the real world as deployed or as close as possible. You've never had that situation where some bit of software worked on the developers' machines but didn't work in production, right? That never happens. Does it? Real world. Iterative, incremental, yada yada. And with an eye of making it anti-fragile. When something breaks, and especially when it breaks badly, what can we do not only to prevent that, but what can we do to make the organization, the team, the code stronger? So not only will that not happen next time, but a whole class of things like that won't happen next time. We don't want to change or adopt. People don't like change. There's that saying that only wet babies like change. No, they don't. They scream too. Nobody likes change. We don't want to adopt new processes. We want to experiment and adapt. Right? As much as people don't like change, they really hate to be changed. Is there anything that makes your heart sink more than getting that memo from the CEO saying, we're doing everything all different starting Monday? And, Rick lays out this 27 points. You got new titles. They're moving the building around you. You're agile now. You're doing it. Blah, blah, blah. Horrible, right? You need to be part of the process, right? It's like putting your egg in, the old Betty Crocker consultant story. They had to get consumers to put the egg in to feel part of the process and boost sales. It was apocryphal, but it's a nice story. But you want to be part of the process, and it needs to be non-threatening. It's much easier to say, okay, we're going to do an experiment. We want to be sure we always have two eyes on the code. And we've tried code reviews before, and they haven't worked out real well. It ends up being a witch hunt. Personalities get involved. We're going to try pair programming. Might work, might not. It's an experiment. We're going to try it. Where it doesn't work, we'll find out why and see if we can fix that. It's much less threatening to know this is an experiment you're trying instead of, we are now a customer-focused pair programming organization, blah, blah, blah. It sounds like some damn mission statement. So again, the whole point of running experiments is to get feedback, but feedback can be tricky. And it's easy enough to say, get feedback on all things, but it's not always that easy. You need concrete and measurable feedback, not some kind of abstract or preachy, well, we want to be sure of quality. There's a great Dilbert cartoon, I think it was this week, where they had the quality assurance guy, who was this guy who ran around the team saying, we've got great quality, I assure you. We do, we got quality. We got the best quality, we got quality everywhere. We've got nothing but quality. And that was his job, was running around assuring people they had quality. Now, we want something concrete and measurable, short time horizons, nothing that takes weeks or, God help you, months. We just don't have time for that these days. So, experiments in the gross sense are cheap. This is not something where you're going to have some huge data farm or bring in a team of 60 people or anything ridiculous like that. They're cheap to run, short time frame, time boxed, generate specific outcomes that you can test against, agree up front what those conditions are, and most importantly, have the attitude that no experiments fail. You may not get the results you wanted, but nothing fails. It gives you data from which you can make a real decision. So, at the early stages of the Dreyfus model, stages 1 to 3, where we have to be kind of checklisty and spoon-fed, we give a kind of directed empirical approach, a canned experiments, concrete and unambiguous. And if you go to growsmethod.com, where these pictures come from, we've got these little post-it notes of practices. So something like for early stage 1, version control, right? Very simple, really basic, very simple experiment to run. Go to an empty machine, check out the project, build it. It either works or it don't. If it doesn't work, you've got work to do. If it works, you passed. Awesome. On to the next stage. Very concrete, very easy to do. By the time you get up to the higher stages, stages 4 and 5, you will want to design your own experiments and get your own feedback. You're off the map, as it were. But feedback is a very subtle thing, especially if you're getting it from people. So you need more advanced techniques. You have to go beyond sort of naive, introspection meeting. Hey guys, we get together, how'd it go? Okay, good, it's beer o'clock, we're out of here. That's not an effective introspection. You need more techniques in that. So books like Agile Retrospectives that Pragmatic Bookshelf publishes, the Retrospective Handbook, there's several others. This sort of resource goes through with dozens of consultant tricks of what to do with dot votes and sticky notes and whiteboards and the kind of things to help you elicit the feedback that just sitting there and asking for it's not going to get you, right? And it's like trying to do a door-to-door survey on drinking habits, right? You can't just go to the door and say, hey, are you drunk? Right? If you go to a college campus, you're going to get a lot of false positives. Oh, yeah, we drink all the time. And if you go to, some other segment of the population, they're like, oh, no, not at all. No, sir, officer. No, not a bit. So you got to be more circumspect about it, more advanced about it. But the important thing is to do experiments, to try stuff, to poke stuff and find out what happens. Because the key to writing software is, ironically, to write software. Find out how it works. This is how we answer questions. What architecture should we use? What JavaScript framework should we use today? How long will it take you to write it? How much will it cost? What do the users want? I got no idea. My crystal ball is broken. So you know what? You write something. You try it. You put it in front of them. You see what happens. For picking a tech stack, we do it by experiments. With a time box, 1 week. Set up and run Hello World in 3 competing JavaScript frameworks. Whoa, boss can't do that because this one framework we really want to use, it's going to take us a month to set up. Interesting piece of data. Might want to see that. Might want to go somewhere different with that. Again, it's not a fail, it's data. It's also not a rubber stamp. You need at least 3 things to try. Otherwise, you're going to have the thing that you want and then some fake, lame thing that no one's going to pick. So you need at least 3. We adopt process the same way. This is how we add to the practices. Have an experiment and try it. Again, it's not a rubber stamp. We're not definitely going to do pair programming or a Kanban board or whatever it might be, but we're going to try it and see what happens. We want to do this, as I said initially, with the tracer bullet idea, real code in real time under real conditions, We introduced this idea back in Pragmatic Programmer. It was expanded on in Ship It. And the idea, you take that end-to-end, very thin, hello world, 2 lines of code. You've got boxes in all the right places, but the boxes may be empty in most of them. But it goes end to end. It's that first cable of the bridge. And you build and thicken as you go along. This helps establish APIs early, enforces an interface-based approach, enables automation, parallel, yada yada, and it helps to avoid the big ball of mud anti-pattern, which is also still, unfortunately, very popular. So, okay, that sounds great. How do we get started with this kind of thing? Well, this diagram tries to show the key features of GROWS. You've got the feedback circle. You've got everyone involved, executives, developers, QA, testers, architects, users, whatever. You've got the Dreyfus model of the side from stage 1 to stage 5, going from safety through checklists, through recipes, through smooth adaptation, through replicating and teaching, all being driven by the thin thread of a growing tracer bullet development. We give a path, which you notice is not a linear straight line. These paths take curves and turns, but start with this, add this, throw this on. Look at several core practices, including, you probably can't read that, but things like you do one thing at a time. Excellent advice when debugging, right? Excellent advice when changing process. Always take small bites. That's the core of Agile right there. Never anything large, no large ceremonies, no large events. Small, stable teams. Studies have shown, I've got the reference, they work. When you start reassigning people and having large teams, you start to fall down. Small, stable teams work out better. The closet principle, throw out before you add. My wife likes that one in particular. Adopt from experiments, adopt process from experiments, remove proxies to people, measure actual results, not wishful thinking. And the important one is before you get started on any of this kind of stuff, get all the participants to actually agree to at least try. That's key. So where do we start? The very basics. Clean version control, clean build, time box development. If everyone did at least this, you'd have a 40% increase in the number of effective teams in the industry. Because about 40-50% of current teams who claim to be Agile aren't actually doing this. They claim they are, but then you start asking questions and you realize they're not actually. So we start with the basics. From there you can add things like setting team interruption protocols, helping train executives and leaders when they have the corporate vision. Don't give me that stupid mission statement about a customer-focused, responsive, blah, blah. Tell me what you really want. And let's get a decent conversation going. Adding experiments, adding users, that sort of thing. Getting more of those practices to follow. Each practice we've got labeled up on the website says what it is. Here's a team-wide interruption protocols. Tells you what problem you're trying to solve, what the pain points are, what the benefits are, and gives you the adoption experiment. Here's the setup. Here's what you do. Here's the feedback you look for. What does it look like if you're doing it right? And we try to do this for all the practices that we recommend. Then you get on to the higher stages. You begin to add more participation, more inspection, more time for learning, these kinds of things. And then by stage 4 and 5, there are no diagrams. That's for you to figure out. And for that, we'd like your help. We'd like your input. growsmethod.com, it's all up online. It's all free. Follow us on Twitter. Tell folks about it. We'd love your input. Thank you so much for having me. I think lunch is next.